All right, Islam, and welcome to Moorish Heritage and History School. This is your host, Anahita L. Today, let's see, Wednesday, May 24th, 1437. Moorish calendar year, 2017 Christian calendar year. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. And I'm trusting that it will be interesting for you. It's interesting to me only because I have read a good portion of the information that I would like to share with you today. The reason why I was thinking of doing this is because I know a lot of people may not have gotten some of the books that have been referenced. And in actuality, I didn't even know about these books. I have to give it up to uplifted at one of his many lectures at Moorish Heritage and History School. He mentioned two or three books. I wrote them down, and I went looking for them, and I found them, and I found some other books. One of the books that I read is entitled They Were White and They Were Slaves. That one is a little bit more graphic. Let's see. They Were White and They Were Slaves, The Untold History of the Enslavement, or I should say the enslavement of whites in early America. And the author's name is Michael A. Hoffman II. That one's a little bit more graphic. And, maybe if everyone, if I get some positive feedback about this from the nurse, maybe, we'll read and review that book as well. So if you haven't figured it out, what I'm going to do today, and I'm still trusting that it will be agreeable and enlightening for everyone, I'm going to read about an hour from this book entitled Colonists for Sale. Colonists for Sale. The author is Clifford Lindsay Alderman. Colonists for Sale. The author is Clifford Lindsay Alderman, and it's the story of indentured servants in America. More like in the slave, the true story of the true slave of this continent. And I remember having a conversation with Abdullah, and I was trying to ask the question, and he was saying, you can't start over here on this Moroccan American soil. He's absolutely correct. You can't. With everything, you really can't start here because it didn't begin here. A lot of the history, our history actually it encompasses planet Earth. So if you really want to get a well-rounded picture of our heritage, you have to look at, what was going on on the entire planet Earth to get a full picture. If you just go to what they today refer to as America, you're going to get a piece. If you go to what they refer to today as Great Britain, you're going to get another piece. If you go to what they refer to today as France, you're going to get another piece. So everywhere you go, you're going to get a piece, but not the whole heritage. So you really have to. You can't for the Asiatic or melanated people of planet Earth. Don't get caught up in all people come from Africa, and so let me now go to Africa. you have to know the modern word, but this land that they classify as America was also once called Africa. So you don't have to go to where you already are. This book, Colonists for Sale, I bought it secondhand. It's the hardcover, excellent condition from Amazon.com. But I can tell you when I started purchasing it, and I believe as word of it gets out, maybe we will read the entire book and then talk about it. I'm not saying we're going to read the entire book today. We're just going to probably read an hour's worth of it. And then what I'm going to do is open up the line and we can have conversation, a group conversation about the information that was presented. The reason why I think this book is excellent, this book and the other one, They Were White and They Were Slaves, because this whole story, I mean literally story, that we were fed about slavery that we were taught to, was pretty much visited only on the Asiatic melanated people. It is such a huge lie. It is so false that it is ridiculous. This book, Colonists for Sale, starts to put some things in perspective. And when you read they were white and they were slaves, you really get, you really get a a clear, extremely clear picture of who the slaves really were. You have to keep in mind that this story that is being, this information that is being presented, we've been mentally conditioned to believe that the people who are imposing this on the Albion, which are the slaves, is other Albion, but that's not correct. The people who were imposing this actually was the British Moors. That's where the population came from. I just wanted to let you tell everyone, if you like this, what we're doing today, please send an email to mhhs@gmail.com and just, let me know what you think about this particular type of a forum where we're reading a book that everyone may not have access to, may not have for information purposes. This is not fiction. This book is not a fictitious book. This is actual events. It's actually got footnotes, saying with that they were white and they were slaves. Actually, I'm not sure if it's this one or I'm not sure if it's Colonists for Sale or They Were White and They Were Slaves. They literally give you references out of the Virginia statute. So this is not fictitious. This literally did happen. This is not somebody's fictitious story. All right. This is the heritage of the Albion. It's not a very nice one. So I can understand why Moors overall, whether we participated in it or our cousins or some sort of our family, I can understand why we're suffering the things that we're suffering today, because what we did to the Albion was no joke. All right, so I'm going to start off with Chapter 1 from the Colonists for Sale. Like I said, I'm going to read it for about an hour. So I'm going to read till about, 9 o'clock. If I can go that long, it's about 10 minutes away from 8 o'clock. So I'm going to read from 8 to 9 or until I get tired, which might be before 9. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the telephone line to anyone who wants to have a group discussion about what was read. All right? So about 9 o'clock, you can press 1 on your telephone dial, and I will begin to open up the line to everyone who wants to have a group discussion. We will have this type of a discussion for the first time on the Military History School and HHS Eyes Wide Open platform. All right? So, Chapter 1 is entitled The Frightful Journey. In 1750, a congregation of German immigrants in the colony of Pennsylvania scraped together enough money to buy what they had greatly desired for their church in the settlement of New Providence. Not many churches in the American colonies had organs by the middle of the 18th century, and there were few, if any, American organ makers then. Importation of the instruments from Europe was the rule. Because of this, and perhaps also because the settlers of New Providence put more trust in an organ made in Germany, they ordered it from there. They commissioned an organist, Gottfried Mittelberger, from the Duchy of Württemberg, southern Germany, their homeland, to arrange for the shipping and to export the precious instrument to America himself. Mittelberger left his village of Ensweigen and traveled a short distance to Heilbronn in the Duchy of Baden, where the organ was. Heilbronn is on the Neckar River, which flows northwestward through Heidelberg and into the Rhine River. After overseeing the packing and loading of the organ into the riverboat, Mittelberg boarded the craft and began the long journey down the Rhine to Rotterdam, Holland's greatest seaport. His experiences on the voyage and during his stay in Pennsylvania prompted him to write an account of them later. Jammed into the boat with him were a large number of people from southern Germany and the German-speaking part of Switzerland who were also bound for Pennsylvania. Most of them were farmers and their families, although there were some artisans, mostly mechanics and a few scholars and other educated people. All had one thing in common, who had been told of the glories of the promised land of Pennsylvania, its beauty, fertility, freedoms, and the great opportunities that lay ahead of them to improve their way of life. They were looking forward to their arrival in Philadelphia with the keenest anticipation, for their lives in Germany and Switzerland had not been easy. They had saved enough money to pay their passage to Rottenburg and across the Atlantic, or so they thought and had been told. The unexpected and shocking frightfulness of their venture began with the passage to Rottenburg. There were 36 custom houses along the way, examination of the cargo, and the payment of customs duties or tolls imposed for passage through the region. It took such boats 4 or 5, sometimes 6 weeks to reach Rotterdam. For Gottfried Mittelberg himself, the entire journey from Ensweigen to Rotterdam lasted 7 weeks. The boat was packed from stem to stern, and the terrible crowded conditions made the river trip a nightmare, but this trip compared to what lay ahead for the passengers. First came a long delay in Rottenburg, while the ship that was made to take them to America loaded cargo and waited for late arriving shipments. Mittelberg did not say just how long they were there. But he wrote that the usual delay for such vessels was 5 or 6 weeks. During this time, the several hundred passengers had to shift for themselves. The people had not expected this delay, and since food and other necessities very high priced in Rothenburg, they found the money they had brought dribbling away. Some became penniless, and others spent almost all they had, with their transatlantic passages still not paid. This made no difference to the promoters of the immigration to America. In fact, they were counting on it. At last, the time for embarking came. The shipping company took no precautions for the safety of the passengers as they crowded aboard, pushing and shoving, each anxious to have the best choice of accommodation. Middleburg saw a man with 2 children crossing a slimy, ramshackle gangway into the ship. The children slipped, fell overboard, and were drowned. Middleburg himself seemed to have suffered no privation during the voyage. His passage money was assured, and presumably he had a cabin to himself and dined with the officers. But what he observed tore his heart with pity and anguish. He wrote that the immigrants were packed like herrings into the space set aside for them belongings, including tools and implements, water barrels, and provisions, if he had any left. The vessel crossed the North Sea and put in at Coes in the Channel coast of England. There, some cargo was discharged and examined, customs duties paid, and more cargo loaded for Philadelphia. The ship was imposed 9 days. Then she began the Atlantic passage. From Rothenburg to Philadelphia, the voyage lasted 15 weeks. Middleburg wrote, "The journey is made amid such hardship as no one is able to describe." But he did describe it to the best of his ability, and the account is enough to turn one's stomach. He wrote of the vile conditions in which the immigrants lived. The rations were scanty, stale, and had a sharp smell. Some of the meat was so putrid that a dog would have turned up his nose at it. Warm food was served only 3 times a week. The water was often black. Passengers' quarters, almost all were sick at one time or another. Many were seasick and unable to reach the upper deck in time, vomiting in their bunks. Many suffered from fever, dysentery, constipation, boils, and the seafaring man's disease at that time, scurvy. Scurvy results from a lack of green vegetables or such citrus fruits as lemons or limes in the diet, and causes the gums to swell and bleed. Middleburg called it Mount Stormy Atlantic. When a gale rose, conditions were made worse. As the vessel rolled and pitched, plunging down deep into the trough between the tremendous seas, people were thrown about hither skelter. In their terror, they thought the vessel was lost, and they cried and prayed piteously to be saved. The passengers grew irritable, and fights broke out between them. Middleburg wrote that those who were not ill sometimes came near killing each other in these brawls. And among the people were some who lost no opportunity to rob and cheat others in the hope of improving their impoverished condition. Middleburg told the peering passengers cry, "Oh, that I was at home again and had to lie in my pigsty. Oh, God, if I only had a piece of good bread or a fresh drop of water." Many died. One would think that the promoters of the immigration would have made some effort to keep the passengers healthy, since it would have been their profit when the vessel arrived at Philadelphia. But they evidently considered it cheaper to lose a substantial part of the human cargo and to deliver others in conditions than to spend more to give the people decent quarters, food, and water. Those who died were heaved overboard without ceremony. One wretched woman died in childbirth, unable to deliver the child because of her condition. Her quarters were far aft, and since the body could not easily be brought forward and on deck through the close-packed mass of humanity, it was stuffed through a porthole and into the sea. The small children among the passengers suffered the most. Middleburg wrote that those between 1 and 7 years old seldom survived these voyages. He added that measles and smallpox often broke out aboard the transport, and the younger ones usually contracted one or the other and died. Of the older passengers, those who were able to creep on deck occasionally for a breath of fresh air, sometimes suffering falls in rough weather as the ship tossed in mountainous seas and were crippled. Others were swept overboard, and Middleburg made no mention of any effort to save them. Middleburg was not a skillful writer, but his diary conveys a vivid image of the passengers' quarters, the fearful smell, the moans of the sick, the cries and pitiful prayers of others, the wailings of children, the disorder. As the voyage neared its end, after what must have seemed an eternity, a new catastrophe fell upon the passengers. The food supply had been scanty at best, except that for the officers' table, of course, and doubtless proof that now even that ran short due to the unusual length of the stormy voyage. The immigrants were fed only ship biscuits, hardtack, that had long since spoiled and was infested with weevil, saving them. Even the very sick began to feel better. All thought that their troubles were over, not knowing that they had only begun. For most of the immigrants, what lay ahead was as bad in its way as the torments they had already undergone. As soon as the ship docked in Philadelphia, the passengers were told that no one whose passage money was not paid or who could not give good security for its payment would be allowed to go ashore. The immigrants had paid at least 40 florins, exorbitant amount, to provide themselves with food and lodging during the long wait in Rotterdam, and additional costs at Cowes. And the passage from Rotterdam to Philadelphia cost 60 florins, 10 pounds in English money, a large sum in those days, except for children between 5 and 10 who went for half fare, and those under 5 who were given free passage. Few could afford to pay such a charge now. A handful of them had managed German Riksdaler to pay for the voyage or had relatives waiting who would pay the money, so they were allowed to depart. The rest waited for their unknown fate. Each day thereafter, prosperous English, Dutch, and German colonists came from Philadelphia and surrounding towns, some as much as 20 to 40-hour ride away, and boarded the ship to bargain for the services of the penniless passengers. Those who suited their buyers signed indentures, bonds, which required them to serve their new master with money and food, clothing, and lodging during the service. The buyer would then pay the captain or an agent of the shipping company the amount agreed upon for the passage and take his human purchases with him. All these unfortunate people were to become slaves with white skins, indentured servants who were indeed slaves in every sense of the word until they gained their freedom. Nor did all gain that freedom when their terms of servitude had expired. Strength was what most buyers wanted. They had little use for scholars, teachers, and other educables, those who could hoe down great forest trees, remove stumps and undergrowth, and clear land for new fields and meadows. A muscular, heavy young man would get off with 3 years of servitude, but women, children, and older men had to serve 6 years. Children between 5 and 10 signed indentures or had them signed for them by their parents that required them to work without pay until they came to the age of 21. The very sick were sent to hospice. If they recovered, they had to serve long enough to pay for their children of such parents, or of those unable to work often had to serve additional time to pay off these costs. Families were often separated, not to see each other for years, sometimes never again. The voyage described by Godfrey Middleburg was not an unusual one. A great many other immigrations took place under similar wretched and cruel conditions, but the miseries of these transatlantic crossings were only the beginning of the story of indentured servitude in America, which was a well-established system. A sizable number of the settlers in the American colonies during that period came as indentured servants. Many suffered from hard labor under conditions to which they were not accustomed, and some died. Others were harshly treated by the masters who had brought them. Still others served months and sometimes years of extra servitude, cheated by unscrupulous masters of freedom they should have gained when their terms of servitude expired. On the whole, the story of the system, not a pleasant one. All right, one. And I'm trusting that it is sounding interesting. It's 11 after 8, and we're going to go into Chapter 2 of Colonists for Sale. Chapter 2 is entitled How It Began. During the terrible summer of 1607, more than half of slightly over 800 all-male settlers, permanent American colony at Jamestown, Virginia, died of dysentery and malaria. When the following winter ended, only 35 of the men remained alive in spite of the heroic achievement of Captain John Smith in trading for food with the Indians. That would be the Moor. But with the arrival of ships from England in the spring with food and new colonists, Virginia began to expand and thrive. To the north, when the Pilgrims settled Plymouth, the story of the colonists died in the winter of 1620 to 21. Nevertheless, the survivors planted crops and worked them, so after a good summer, they were able to enjoy a plentiful first Thanksgiving. And as in Virginia, the Plymouth colony prospered and grew in size. Farther north, stern Puritans settled Boston in 1630, and the colony grew and spread out into surrounding settlements rapidly. Other settlements in America soon followed. A tide of immigration, at first chiefly from England, set in. Early years of colonization, although many gentlemen settlers brought servants with them, most of the work of establishment and making a living was done by the settlers themselves, men, women, and children. This soon changed. As farms and plantations grew larger and trade increased, so did the need for more labor increase. In Maryland and Virginia especially, once it was discovered that fortunes could be made from large tobacco plantations, the need for hands to work in the fields became acute. This need was greatest in the colonies from New York south. For some time, New England was largely a region of small farm fishermen. Soon, in the colonies where sea trade grew important, it was the demand for clerks and merchants, counting houses, coopers, and cargo handlers in the waves, rope makers and sail makers, carpenters to put up new houses, warehouses, and other buildings, many of the other artisans and servants for the houses of prosperous men. However, New England used fewer indentured servants than some other colonies that had good seaports. New England was more inclined to use especially boys who were apprenticed to work without wages in order to learn a trade. In brief, there were shortages of all kinds of labor. True, new settlers were arriving from England as well as other parts of Europe, but not enough working people wanted to or were financially able to give up their homes abroad and take the risk of coming to a new land. Yet England, Germany, Switzerland, Ireland, Scotland, and other countries were veritable gold mines for this labor so precious to the new colonies. Look first at England. For centuries, the common people there lived under a feudal system that had been introduced by William the Conqueror after he subdued the country in 1066. They were little better than slaves to the great lords who owned vast lands and big manor houses. Many English peasants lived on lands owned by the monasteries and abbeys of the English Church, which were mostly enormously rich and as tyrannical toward their tenant farmers as the great lord. In the 16th century, King Henry VIII severed ties between the English Church in Rome when the Pope refused to grant him a divorce from Catherine of Aragon so that he could marry Anne Boleyn, the highest-ranking bishop in England. The Archbishop of Canterbury then granted the divorce. With that, Henry began the dissolution of the monastery and abbey. This had little beneficial effect on the peasants who lived on church land, since Henry sold or gave away most of the properties to the Lord. The farmers continued to live in want and misery. Soldiers formed another poverty-stricken group. Under the feudal system, England had no regular army. The great lords maintained their own forces in case of war. These soldiers could be called in to fight for the king. Feudalism waned slowly in England, but by the time of Henry VIII's reign, it had almost vanished, and the lords, unable to keep up their little private army, had turned them out. Under Henry's daughter, the great Queen Elizabeth I, science had begun to make tremendous strides. Machinery and new types of tools were developed during her reign from 1558 to 1603 that could do a man's work or help him do it more quickly. Fewer workmen were needed in many trades. The powerful system of guilds, much like modern trade unions, grew weaker as machines forced many workers out of their jobs. By the time the feudal system was officially abolished during the reign of King Charles II in the 17th century, transition from feudalism to a commercial economy had already taken place, and a further change to an industrial one was in progress. Perhaps the worst economic disaster fell upon the thousands of tenant farmers who lived on the Lord's land, common land, where all the local peasants could graze their cattle. Now, individuals were allotted small farms, and the common lands were enclosed by hedges so that the Lord could use them for grazing large flocks of sheep. Raising sheep for wool to be manufactured into woolen clothes and become a highly important and profitable business for England. The small farmers could not afford to buy large flocks of sheep or enclose them on their own small acres. Furthermore, with the common lands enclosed, they could no longer graze the cattle upon which they depended largely for a living. Many could not exist on their small farms and became wanderers searching for work. Began in the 16th century, but increased sharply at the beginning of the 18th, was bitterly opposed and hated by the common people, yet it continued to spread rapidly nonetheless. All these deprivations combined to create a great mass of poverty-stricken people. The tendency was for them to drift to the large cities where industry offered at least some chance to find work. But because most were unskilled at any trade, there was little or no work for them. Many became beggars or turned to crime, even though a person could be hanged for stealing a loaf of bread. Their misery was so great that whenever they obtained a little money, they spent it not on food, but on gin, which was cheap then and could provide some solace from their troubles. The slum districts of London and other large cities became cesspools filled with drunkards, desolate women, thieves, pickpockets, beggars, and other rudes, as well as diseased persons. Those who could pay for lodgings lived in filthy ramshacks. Those who could not found their only homes in the streets and alleys. Conditions grew worse as the 17th century wore on. By 1688, poverty was so widespread that an English economist calculated that the income of more than half the country's population were less than their living expenses. He estimated that there were 849,000 families of this kind, averaging 3/4 persons per family. English poor laws provided for the collection of taxes for the relief of the needy, yet in 1685, poor law taxes collected were only £665,000. This would have been about $3.75 a year per family in United States currency at its original value of about $5 per British pound sterling. Even at that time, when this amount would buy far more than today, it was a pitifully inadequate sum. In the English Jam, the workhouses, which were practically prisons, where penniless people were put to work at whatever could be found for them to do, controlled by brutal overseers, they insisted on food that was scanty, of poor quality, and often rotten. The actual prisons were usually very overcrowded, even though in London parks filled with condemned convicts rambled almost daily to the public gallows called Tyburn Tree, where mobs pushed and jostled to get a better view of the hanging. Institutions in other cities could not begin to reduce the surplus of felons in England. Something had to be done to get rid of the unwanted poor and criminals. The law allowed convicts to be transported out of England, and many were sent to the West Indies and the American colonies. But this made no more than a dent in the overpopulation, and convict labor was unpopular in the colonies because most felons were of the lowest character, poor workers who made trouble. The solution was to persuade the more deserving poor to immigrate to America. The government's idea was excellent, but carrying it out was quite another thing. In spite of their wretchedness, the poor was not at all anxious to go to America. For one thing, it was unknown territory and therefore frightening. For another, many realized that immigration to America would mean hard work in the wilderness across the ocean, and they preferred to live in poverty without exerting themselves. If the English government was to dumping its unwanted surplus ore in America, it was either going to have to find ways of making immigration attractive or use forcible means. England was not the only source to satisfy the American colonies' need for labor. In parts of Germany and the German-speaking region of Switzerland, there were plenty of people who might be persuaded to leave if they could be made to see America as a land of opportunity. The Rhine, one of the great rivers of the world, also has some of the finest scenery in Europe. Flowing northward, it remains and the vicinity of Boom, which is known as the Rhine-Gore, for a distance of about 80 miles on both sides of the majestic, swift-flowing river, as well as the several smaller tributaries that empty into it there. Hills and mountains rise. Topping their summits are dozens of ancient castles, today mostly in various stages of ruin, about which strange and romantic legends have grown. Below the castles, vineyards ramble down the hillsides, towns and villages huddled between the river and the heights. It is rich agricultural country, famed for its fine wine, a good place to live and prosper, one would think. The Germans of the Rhine country did love their homeland and would have prospered in the 17th century, but for the hardships they suffered in those years. At that time, the Rhineland, including what was then a collection of little principalities, duchies, and counties called the Lower Ground armies that marched across it. On their way, they seized and destroyed castles, burned villages, looted, and committed terrible atrocities among the inhabitants. These troubles began with the 30-year War from 1618 to 1648 involving Germany, Austria, Spain, and France. In 1620, the Rhine region was overrun by troops from the Netherlands, which was then held by Spain. There followed a period of peace, but late in the 17th century, Louis XV of France banished Netherlands and raised a huge army to do it. The army's route in this conflict, known as the Dutch War, lay through the Rhineland. In 1688, French soldiers fell upon the medieval walled town of Antwerp and burned it. Another French army wrought much more fearful devastation in 1689. The aftermath of the Dutch War was less frightful, but it brought new hardships to the hard-working peasants of the Rhineland. All the little states that formed the region was governed by many of whom occupied the famed castles of the region. When Louis XV built his enormous palace at Versailles, just outside Paris, the rulers of the Rhineland states were envious of his splendor and luxury. They tried to imitate on a small scale the way of life that the French king had established. The bill for their efforts, of course, was paid by the peasants. Cruel taxes were levied on the farmers, and the long succession of toll stations in the Rhine made the cost of shipping wines and other products to Rothenburg for export so high that little profit remained. Palatinate went from the suffering and destruction the wars had brought to lives of poverty in which they could barely scrape out any system. They were ripe for the change. Many were ready to move to any place that would give them a chance for better life. In the German-speaking part of Switzerland that rims southern Germany, the land had been torn by religious strife and the rule of petty tyrants. Towering alpine peaks, limited agriculture, largely to dairy farming. The discontent peasants there were also ready for a change. Ireland, the beautiful Emerald Isle, poor, miserable people too. For centuries, the country has suffered the persecution and discrimination of its overlord, England. The harsh protector, Oliver Cromwell, vented upon Ireland his Puritan hatred of Catholics when he landed an army in Dublin in 1649. For the next 3 years, he devastated Ireland, capturing town after town, butchering not only the Irish soldiers, but also innocent men, women, and children by the thousands. 5/6 of the Irish population died, while most of those who remained were pushed into the townland of Western Ireland. On the better land, Englishmen established great estates. In 1660, when the Irish people had managed to make some recovery and establish an export trade in woolen, the English Parliament forbid them this encroachment upon England's own trade in woolen clothes. When the Irish turned to exporting raw wool, this trade too was stopped. Meanwhile, Irish tenant farmers who rented land on the big English-owned estates were forced to pay such high rent that eviction of tenants behind in their payments was a common sight. Many could find no other living and starved. Here were people who needed no persuasion to immigrate from Ireland. They simply wanted to learn where they could find a new homeland that offered some chance to live decently and how they might get there. In Scotland, the conditions for tenant farmers in the Highlands was also bad, especially in the 18th century when several poor crop years added to their poverty as grasping landlords kept raising their rent. In spite of the money squeezing landowners, some of these Scots had somehow scraped together over the years enough money to pay their way to America. They, too, only needed to find out what the colonies offered. Thus, on the one hand, most of the American colonies were crying out for new settlers to provide labor and skills. On the other, English, German, Swiss, Irish, and Scots had reasons to seek new homes. But to them, America was a wilderness that did not seem to warrant the expense of the long voyage across the stormy Atlantic. How could they be convinced that the colonies were instead to realize how this might be accomplished was the Virginia Company, also called the London Company, an organization of merchants and wealthy men in England chartered by King James I to establish the first permanent American colony of Virginia. The English government, in financial trouble and at its wit's end about how to solve the problem of its great masses of poor, was only too glad to let a private company try it. Settlement of Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607 had been made by a group of gentlemen adventurers, more interested in getting what they could out of Virginia than in colonization. But the Virginia Company soon decided that the new settlement offered prospects for long-term profits through actual colonization. In 1609, published a broadside, a kind of an advertisement that was circulated in London. All workmen of whatever craft they may be, blacksmiths, carpenters, coppers, shipwrights, turners, and such as known how to plant vineyards, and all others, men as well as women, who had any occupation were invited to meet at Sir Thomas Smith's house where they could be enrolled. The broadside made lavish promises of what those who signed up would receive. Each person was to be given 500 reals. This Spanish silver coin, all kinds of money, especially Spanish circulated in England then, varied in value over the years. But in America, money, the amount would have been somewhere between about $25 and $50, a considerable sum in those days. The new colonists were also to be provided with houses, orchards, and vegetable gardens, food and clothing, all free from the Virginia Company. Moreover, after 7 years, the settlers would share in the profits the company had made in its venture in Virginia and receive free land. A few years later, Governor Sir George Yardley promised that a share would amount to as much as 100 acres apiece. Colonists would not be indentured servants since they did not have to sign bonds for any specific length of time, although they would have to remain 7 years to share in the profits and land. It was not long, however, before indentures made their appearance. The first one that is known is dated September 7, 1619, issued by 4 English gentlemen who proposed to establish what became known as Berkeley Hundreds in Virginia. For Berkeley Hundreds, there were no glittering promises like those of the Virginia Company. The prospective settlers signed indentures agreeing to serve a certain length of time to pay off the cost of their transportation to America. From then on, all settlers who could not pay the cost of their transportation signed indentures. They were no longer freemen, but slaves of the planters who bought them until they worked off their debt. By 1636, forms were printed with blank spaces to be filled in by the prospective settlers and whoever arranged for their transportation. England, the plan worked only fairly well. In spite of promises and glowing descriptions in the broadsides of the wanderers and opportunities that lay ahead of them in the New World, the English common people did not immigrate to America in vast numbers to become indentured servants. Meanwhile, in America, the demand for labor was increasing at a rate that far outdistanced the number of immigrants from Europe. In Maryland and Virginia, raising tobacco had become so profitable that planters were desperate for help to clear the land of its forests and undergrowth and establish larger plantations. In the other colonies, the demand was less, but still strong. In Germany and German-speaking Switzerland, there was a large supply of the labor needed for America. But because of the dissatisfaction of the people, these regions knew little of the opportunities the New World offered. There was little more than a trickle of immigration until one of America's most famous men, William Penn, solved the problem. Penn's American colony of Pennsylvania was among the last of the 13 to be established. In 1682, Penn and some of his followers came to join an advance party which had arrived in 1681 and was already at work surveying and clearing land, laying out Philadelphia. Penn stayed here to supervise the work and to draw a set of laws which he was determined should make Pennsylvania free, well-governed, and prosperous in order that it should live up to the name of its first settlement, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. Then he went back to England. William Penn may be called America's greatest promoter, or, as he would be described today, A land developer of his time. Like the Virginia Company and some others in England, he too issued a broadside describing the beauty and fertility of Pennsylvania, and the opportunities it offered settlers for a good life, freedom, and fortune. His description was alluring, and he had it printed in English, German, and Dutch. His agents in Europe saw to it that the pamphlets were widely distributed. Penn's plan was to persuade well-to-do Europeans to immigrate to America, bringing indentured servants with them. Each servant was to be given 50 acres of land as soon as he had paid off the cost of his journey. The broadside obtained the greatest immediate response in the Palatinate, including the Rhineland and German-speaking Switzerland as well. Thousands of peasants eagerly seized the chance for relief from the disasters and grinding poverty they had suffered. Penn had no idea that he was sowing the seeds that would produce the misery described by Gottfried Mittelberg. In fact, most of those who came from Germany and Switzerland were redemptioners, a special class of immigrants who expected to be free men in America. Although few were until they had paid off the unexpected extra cost of voyage. Redemptioners signed no indentures before leaving their homeland. They had enough money to pay at least part of their passage to America. Usually, they were confident that they could find relatives or friends already in America who would lend or give them the money to settle the unpaid part of the bill. What actually happened to many of the redemptioners aboard Godfrey Mittelberg's ship is a clue to the fate of others whose hopes of paying off their indebtedness upon arrival in America often were disappointed. Scottish Highlands also responded quickly to Penn's advertisement. Many Scots immigrated to America like Germans and Swiss as redemptioners. In Ireland, William Penn's broadside appealed strongly to thousands of starving homeless men who wandered about the island in search of work of any sort. Ships began sailing from Dublin and Cork for a number of American colonies, loaded to the gunwale with hopeful Irish indentured servants. The demand for indentured servants in America was so great that the colonists, which desperately needed labor, continued to take them for many years, through the 18th century and even into the early 19th. Shipping immigrants to America became a big business in England, Germany, Switzerland, Ireland, and Scotland. Just how big and how evil a trade it became remains to be seen. All right, so that concludes Chapter 2. And we're going to get into Chapter 3 and see how far we can go. What I'm going to try and do is finish Chapter 3, and then we're going to open up the lines to discuss what we have, what I have read and what you have heard, because I believe it's very interesting. This is a history or a heritage that we were never informed of, and it's just even more telling as the book. So Chapter 3 is entitled Spirits and Newlanders. When the lavish descriptions and promises of the Virginia Company and the broadsides published by William Penn and others failed to attract many of England's vast horde of poor people, the British government looked for another solution to the difficulty. It was provided not by the government, but by merchants, ship owners, and wealthy men who saw a chance to reap a golden harvest from the trade in indentured servants. London had the largest share of the English immigrant trade. In the 17th century, though far smaller than today, the city was nevertheless vast and sprawling for its time. By 1660, population was 460,000. By 1700, it had grown half a million. In 1666, the Great Fire had destroyed much of the city, but it was quickly rebuilt and the expansion of its industries and commerce continued. Its people included the rich, nobility, and successful merchants and manufacturers, the small trades who were modestly well off, and the huge mass of the poor. It had great houses, less pretentious but comfortable brick buildings and hovels in the slums. One often might see the glittering coach of a nobleman emblazoned with the insignia of his title and drawn by footprints and horses rolling through the better streets with footmen in white running in front of it. In London's black bars, when the city could become as dark as midnight at noon, hackney coaches patronized by those who could afford them groped their way along, guided ahead by a link boy carrying a flaring torch. On clear days, the city's magnificence could be seen tucked by St. Paul's Cathedral on its hill that dominated the city, the royal palaces and the townhouses of the rich. Spanning the swift-flowing Thames was the London Bridge, solidly lined on both sides with houses and shops whose overhanging upper stories made the narrow roadway look like a tunnel. With a gruesome display of the heads of executed criminals stuck on tall spikes at one end, and there was the splendor of broad Cheapside, the city's central thoroughfare, with its fine shops of goldsmiths, linen drapes, and milliners in excellent tassels. In contrast, one had only to go into the narrow lanes and alleys of slums to find incredible wretchedness. As on London Bridge, the overhanging upper stories of the ramshackle houses made those passageways dark and airless. There was no such thing as garbage collection. People simply threw refuge into the gutter until a heavy rain carried it, at least some of it, away. Part of these rotting masses was also disposed of by the great brown rats that scurried about and the croaking ravens that flopped down out of the sky. Often great heaps of garbage and trash blocked big lumbering wagons and other traffic. The interior of the buildings were dark, cheerless, permanent, damp, and in winter, cold. Here lived London's poor, except for those who were in workhouses, hospitals, or prisons. Here, in spite of its squalor and filth, was the gold mine that could give riches to those who sought new colonies for America. But the poverty-stricken and the idlers of the slums did not want to go to America. They were used to their lives in London and wanted to stay there. Merchants and other agents for American planters in London and several other large English cities were greatly disappointed that broadsides and other advertisements had not worked well at all. They decided that if the people could not be influenced in this way, they might be persuaded in some other. They engaged certain persons to round up, in one way or another, cargoes of colonists for America. These sub-agents were of every sort: yeomen who owned their own small farms, tradesmen, even doctors who might advise their patients that the excellent climate of America would improve their health. The mayor of the port city of Bristol was suspected of having a part in recruiting colonists, and the royal palace gossip had it that certain of the queen's titles laced in wages in return for money to buy extra clothes too were not above persuading palace servants to leave for America. Most of these sub-agents, however, were men with nothing better to do, and many were downright low. These recruiters became known in England as spirits. Some spirits were split-tongued individuals who persuaded their prospects with glowing descriptions of the beauty easy life and opportunities in the colonies, although few had ever been to America, where they congregated to ply their trade. One location was the middle aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral. Strange as it may seem, in the 17th century, this part of the largest and most important church in London became a kind of business street on weekdays. Porters and messengers took shortcuts through the aisle. Many lenders and marriage brokers laid their headquarters there. Horse traders and people with houses to sell hung out in St. Paul. Scribes set up their tables to provide letters for those who could not write. Sea captains out of at berth aboard a ship lounged there, hoping to strike up a conversation with some young idler with money who would exchange a good dinner over a bottle for the spinning of some sea yarn. Hawkers, much like the city sidewalk merchants of today, laid out their wares on the tombstones of prominent Englishmen buried in the crypt under the floor. Visitors who were wise kept a close eye on their purses and watch, for the place was overrun with thieves and pickpockets. St. Paul swarmed with beggars, too, rufflers who claimed to be destitute former soldiers wounded while country, pallors who used choking to gain sympathy, domineers who pretended to be dumb, and query birds, today's expression is stool pigeons, who had turned king's evidence and testified against their Confederates to save their own skins, and also in St. Paul, the sharp-eyed spirits waiting, ready to swoop down on likely suspects. Another place of business for the spirits was the Royal Exchange in the heart of the city, London's business and financial center. It was a U-shaped building opening at the front into a large courtyard. Edging this were porticos over which on the second floor were balconies with all sorts of little shops. As at St. Paul, carriages of all kinds milled about the courtyard, among them the hopeful spirit. As soon as a spirit convinced his prey to go to America, prospective colonists signed an indenture and was taken to safekeeping until he could be loaded aboard ship. Many of the spirits haunted the London slums and those of Bristol and other seaports. It was not difficult to find hungry and thirsty victims who, over a dinner and much liquor, would sign anything put before them. The spirits would then hustle his prey to headquarters to be added to a waiting company of others, safely kept where they could not escape until a ship was ready for them. An easier way was to pick up a sleeping drunk from the gutter and put him aboard a vessel for America, where, with no indenture, he could be sold to his own disadvantage and the American planters' gain. Children were valuable and could be enticed with candy to come along with a spirit. Sometimes they and older people, too, were seized by force. There was not as much of this kidnapping as was generally believed, although it did exist, and the people of London became greatly incensed over it. All that was necessary to start a riot in the crowd was point out some person as a spirit, and he would instantly set upon by angry citizens. Cook's House was as popular in London as hot dogs and similar stands are today on street corners in New York and other large cities. The Cook's House specialized in beef and pork pies. Men stationed outside them cried, hot, hot, get them hot. A good many Cook's Houses were located in disreputable neighborhoods, such as St. Catherine's, near Thames and the Tower of London, inconvenient to the wearer. Since these meat pies were cheap, the spirits often located their headquarters near a Cook's House and sent food in to the future immigrants so that none would attempt to escape before they could be shipped out. Ned Ward, a writer in the early 18th century who wrote wrote, "Paired in at the gateway, where we saw 3 or 4 blades, the spirits well dressed with hawk countenance, attended with half a dozen ragamuffin-leaf fellows, showing poverty in their rags and despair in their faces, mixed with a puzzle of wild limbs, traplings like runaways with pretenses, apprentices. That house," said my friend, "which they are entering is an office where servants for the plantation find themselves." Another description by a writer who called himself the English Road told of his falling in with spirits that took him to Wapping, also a mean and shabby section near the Ware. He said he was taken into a narrow room where spirits sat smoking pipes so vigorously that for a time he could see nothing but smoke. At last he made out 2 other men in the same plight he was, but their conversation was only about the pleasantness of the soil of the continent that they were designed for, to the temptation of the air, the plenty of fowl and the fish of all sorts, the little labor that is performed or expected having so little trouble in it that the earth may be accounted as pastime rather than anything of punishment. The English Road also told of seeing a number of women in the place used as bait by the spirits to snare their prey. It was said that in 1649 that anyone could obtain a servant for America at one of these places by paying 3 pounds to cover the spirit's fee and the cost of feeding his victims. Public outcry against the spirits became so loud that governments were forced to take action against their wrongful activities. Bristol being an important seaport, they law in 1534 requiring that all servants shipped out must be registered, giving their destination and the date their indentures were signed. Those disobeying were to be fined 20 pounds. London followed later, although there was already an act of Parliament charging authorities to be alert against kidnapping for the indentured servant trade and to search vessels and things in the downs at the river's mouth. The new law also required registry, but was not well enforced, perhaps because the government was so anxious to be rid of its surplus of poor and idlers. One spirit operated his business on such a large scale that he was able to offer a great bargain to merchants who wanted servants for America. He was finally caught when another spirit was convicted of illegal shipment of indentured servants, turned king's evidence and told the story of the one who did business at such low prices. The man, he said, had been in the trade at St. Catherine's for 12 years. He would take anyone who turned a victim over to him 25 shillings and then sell his captive to a merchant for 40 shillings. He made money because he exported 500 servants a year on average. In one banner year, he had shipped out 840 of them. Since some spirits were slavery men with no principles, some took advantage of the law against illegal procurement of indentured servants. A group of them would kidnap a victim and get him aboard a ship. Then one of the gang would represent himself as an authorized searcher, discover the kidnapped person, charge the captain with the crime, and demand money for keeping his mouth shut. The same game was used against merchants who shipped out indentured servants. One who refused to pay the blackmail found himself in terrible Newgate prison, charged with kidnapping. This dodge became so common in the 1670s and 1680s that many honest merchants were afraid to buy the indenture of any servant offered by spirits, lest they be accused of kidnapping. In Germany and Switzerland, the counterpart of the English spirit was usually called a Newlander. Another Newlanders were well-dressed, prosperous-looking men with big gold watch chains that impressed the simple peasants tremendously. A good many had actually been to Pennsylvania, and others pretended they had. All told tall stories of the glories of that colony and how easy it was to make comfortable fortune there. The Newlanders plied their trade by first making agreements with shipping companies in Rotterdam, under which they would be paid in Dutch florins, ducats, or Spanish doubloons. For the immigrants they delivered to the seaport, there the Newlanders would get the immigrants to sign indentures unless they were traveling as redemptioners. The Newlanders were no more scrupulous than spirit. If German or Swiss cousins already had relatives in America, the Newlander might find out about it before he talked with them. Then he might tell these credulous people that he had learned in Philadelphia of the death of one of these relatives, that an inheritance was awaiting them, and that he had the legal power to obtain the money for them as soon as they reached Philadelphia aboard a ship with him. Unfortunately, the Newlander was rarely a passenger, nor was there any inhabitant. The Newlander knew perfectly well that the great need in Pennsylvania was for laborers and merchants and mechanics, yet almost any healthy person could be sold in Philadelphia and put to work at hard labor on the plantation. The Newlanders also went after learned and highly skilled people, even the nobility. More than one impoverished nobleman found himself in Pennsylvania working as a laborer. One especially shameful trick was to get immigrants to entrust their money to Newlanders during the trip down the line to Rotterdam. It would be safe with him from thieves to lost. The Newlander would stay not only on the Rhine journey, but during the voyage across the Atlantic, since he would be aboard to see that his passengers were well taken care of. Once the ship sailed from Rotterdam, the immigrants never saw him or their money again. A titled lady fell prey to just such a scene. She had over 1,000 rix dollars, more than ample to pay the entire cost of the trip for herself, 2 teenage daughters, and a young son. She was personally acquainted with the Newlander to whom she entrusted the money and had no doubts of his honesty. Nevertheless, needless to say, he was not aboard the ship bound for America, and the noble lady and her daughters were sold and put to work at menial labor. Often, a Newlander returning from Pennsylvania was entrusted by settlers with letters to their relatives or friends in Germany or Switzerland. In Rotterdam, the letters were open. If they told the truth about difficulties and hardships so many indentured servants suffered, the letter would be destroyed, or better still, rewritten to tell the wonders of life in Pennsylvania by expert handwriting forgers who were available in Rotterdam. The story of Johann Carl Buchner is a good example of how a young man who was afflicted with wanderlust fell victim to a Newlander. He was born in the 18th century in the German Duchy of Saxony. His father was a minister who sent Jonah to school, where the young man decided to become a doctor. He was well on his way to his objective as a doctor's apprentice when he became dissatisfied for some reason and returned home. His father then sent him to Dresden to continue his studies, but suspecting Jonah might not go there, sent the young man's 2 brothers along on the journey. They reached Dresden. The 2 brothers left for home, and Jonah promptly began a roving tour that took him to Prague in present-day Czechoslovakia and on through Hungary to the Balkan country. At last, his journey ended in Hamburg, Germany, with his money almost gone. After a look at Hamburg, Jonah crossed the Elbe River to the suburb of Altona. There he fell into conversation with some friendly and pleasant, though unknown, companions. He felt even better disposed toward them when they discovered he came from Saxony and announced that was their home too. The men were sharp Newlands. They invited Jonah to breakfast, and over a bottle of wine they asked if he would not like to see the far off east. Having learned of his medical studies, they said they would pay his way to Amsterdam and give him a letter of recommendation. Captain of the ship bound for the East Indies, who needed a ship surgeon. Jonah enthusiastically agreed. The Newlanders treated him to a fine midday meal and put him aboard a ship for Amsterdam. There were some 50 other young men and women among passengers, also expecting to go to the Indies. In Amsterdam, Jonah and the rest were disappointed to be told that the ship for the East Indies had just sailed. She doubtless existed only in the minds of the Newlanders and their confederates in Amsterdam. However, a vessel was about to sail for America from Rotterdam, and the group was assured that passage to the wonderful New World would be provided for them. So, Jonah, Carl, Buchanan, and the others were taken to Rotterdam and put aboard the ship. More will be told later about Jonah's trials and hardships after he was sold as an indentured servant in Philadelphia. In this way, English and Dutch merchants built up their profitable trade in indentured service. England, Germany, and Switzerland furnished a large portion of the labor the American colonies needed so badly. But in other countries, this shaft business was also done on a sizable scale. All right, so that concludes chapter 3, and it is through 9. We read for about an hour. So what I will do at this time is if anyone has questions, comments, would like to participate in a discussion regarding information that was read, press 1 on your telephone dot, and what we will also do is try to have like what we'll also do is we will, what I'm trying to do is so that we can have an open discussion. So, if as many people as possible would like to participate in this discussion, then press 1 on your telephone down, and what I will do is I will just go down and unmute each of the callers, and we can begin to have a dialogue about what was read. And you can tell me how you enjoyed it and if you'd like for me to continue. So first and foremost, we will unmute RVBey. Hold on, and I also have Bakari, Islam Bakari. And
Islam.
Right now, that's all I have. But Rob, you wanted to say something. Ron?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you now.
All right. That was me. That was me. All right. First, I want to say, excellent idea, Sister Anita. I didn't realize how well until you started reading. And in my mind, well, I have a couple of comments and questions that I wanted to ask you. But before that, I wanted to say, while you're listening, and I guess maybe this is for people who have done some studies or have heard some things here and some things there. Like some people have heard, oh, yeah, they're Slavics, they were the first slaves here or whatever like that. But as you mentioned, never really learned that as part as, our education and knowledge base, right? So
right.
as you're reading, I just have to commend you. It's a wonderful idea. It is an excellent idea. Now, what was going through my head, and I wanted to comment on, is as you're reading this and you're talking about all the things you've already mentioned, or that has been mentioned, you're talking about how they came here. Just that thought, just that right there. And this history that you're giving regarding them automatically allows us to better accept and acknowledge that they came to this land. And so, this is about their struggle. And yes, I know I'm going to reserve all the comments that people probably are thinking about how it parallels the treatment that we are getting today and that many are getting today. That's pretty clear. But the fact that they came, and then when you go, as we have done, to Ellis Island, and the first thing it says is, despite the myth that North America lay empty and available for taking, European explorers, because, we have 2 or 3 different types of, coming into this, encountered over 200 different cultures whose ancestors had lived here on this continent for thousands of years. So you take that piece, right? Then you go into the definition of American, and you know that it's not them. So what you're reading affirms, and I would trust helps us to get. I mean, that book, what you just read, the first chapter really, and the second and the third, which that's a divine amount of chapters, by the way. It's great. But what you read, it just affirms. Yeah. I was thinking in my mind, she'll stop at 3. I know she will. It affirms the truths, because truth doesn't change or pass away. So it should automatically get the listeners into the frame of, wow, this is their story that they've kind of hidden from us, and then, flipped the script. And the other thing is, it also made me think about how the prophet said, listen, every nation has suffered slavery. He's like getting us out of this, this place where, oh, woe is us, we were slaves, when we were really enslaved, and we suffer for lack of knowledge. What you did tonight, it helps for those to gain some knowledge, and I trust will change our outlook, and therefore our action, reaction, and our strategy and plans of how we will move forward. And lastly, I want to wait until you get the other reason this is beautiful is that it can take us right to the history that, some of it we shared. Like, for instance, we're not there yet, but once they got here and all that happened here, and then when you get to the part where the British was still on their behind, you know what I mean, trying to keep them in line to be work in the companies. You mentioned the first company, Virginia, as well, and others came after that. But once that happened, and then the wars broke out here, then we get to the Articles of Association, where these modern Europeans find themselves wherever they go looking for relief, because the Articles of Association, when they went to the Congress in 1774 to ask for their independence, that ties right into the foundation that you have just laid out, or the truth about who they are and where they came from. So I've said a mouthful, but it is just an excellent idea. We need to definitely keep this going and then bring it right into our current day, because if you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from. So therefore, it also will explain why they're so hell-bent on taking some claim. But as you read, it is so clear that they're just looking for salvation. They're just looking for a place that they can call home But that doesn't mean that because we extended that this is their home. So it just proves so much. Now, my comment, I heard them talk about, and I heard you read about Henry, two things. King, oh, God, did I write that? I can't even understand my own writing. The Virginia colony was handed out by King, I don't even remember this. I can't even remember what I wrote down.
Was it Charles II?
King, well, okay, you talked about Henry. Now, when you said Henry,
yeah.
and then, because I know that everybody knows Henry was kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
Henry VIII was really off the chart. Well, that's identified because it said here that after Henry got in a position that they didn't really want him to get in, he started giving away land. You mean, I think you said to the Moors, or, so I'm thinking, I'm trying to, get straight with what that is, because maybe you didn't say to the Moors, but what he was doing was giving away patents and grants, correct?
Wait a minute, say that again? I'm sorry.
Was he actually offering patents and grants and things like that of land, which is the use of land, not the land itself?
Yeah,
is that what
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That needs to be.
He actually,
right.
he did. What he did was, instead of him, he gave them charters, but they financed their activity as private companies. Actually, and later on, that changed. But right now, he gives them the permission, but they're acting as private companies, but they're allowed to by Henry VIII.
So wait, so now this supports when you were saying, and many of our discussions that when you identify, they're identifying sales territories for real.
Companies, really. I mean, look,
companies.
They're telling you today. People are talking about Virginia like it's a landmass, and the history here is telling you that it's a company, which is what I was saying.
Exactly, and that's the other thing. It affirms all of that. And lastly, when you say to our people, go look up and see these, because these charters then changed to, may have incorporated to corporations, et cetera, and you tell them to go look it up, and what you're going to find is, one, that they are either operating from the charter, but yet the Constitution was to erase all of that. But even if they are operating from the charter, it's a foreign charter. It's an English charter. It's not an American charter.
That's right.
So
that's right.
It has nothing to do with you more American nationals. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And actually, like I said previously, in our own discussion, because you have to understand what the treaty allows. But even before you get into the discussion of the treaty, you have to know that first and foremost, this landmass is the inheritance of the Aboriginal indigenous people. That's why in the Moroccan American Constitution of 1791, which is based on universal law, it talks about unalienable and inalienable. Now, when you look at unalienable and inalienable, you're talking about, go look up the definition, please. People cannot be bought, sold, or transferred. Either your liberty, but your liberty, it's all, your liberties include your inheritance. Your inheritance nor your liberty can be bought, sold, or transferred. So this land was never purchased, ever. What was purchased was through the treaties that was established between Great Britain, Morocco, the Dutch Republic in Morocco, the Portuguese Republic in Morocco. What was purchased the right to come over here and establish a company, much like you got Toyota. Toyota came over here, established a company, and is selling some type of good. But the land that company is sitting on didn't all of a sudden become known as Toyota. You know, so but those people were allowed to come over here and open up shop. But in order for them to do that, they had to first enter into a treaty agreement. And that's what the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, you know, because remember, the United States of America didn't exist prior to 1774. Actually, it's prior to, I think it was prior to 1774.
It couldn't have been before 74.
The Articles of Association.
Right.
The Articles of Association is where they styled themselves as the United States of America, which is a newly formed entity that had no treaty agreement with anyone. That's why the 1786 Treaty of Peace and Friendship had to be entered into, but only could be entered into after they had on paper declared their independence. Now, whether Great Britain agreed to relieve them of that or not, that's still not found. That acknowledgement has not been found. But they because from this history that we're reading, you now know that these were slaves. They did not have any authority to speak or act on their own. They had to get permission from the King of Great Britain. So they literally made an independent decision, and they you know, because of some of these things and more that was going on that culminated in 1774 in them establishing the Articles of Association to protect themselves because they were not getting any protection from their brethren over in Great Britain. And this is a huge missing piece of this puzzle, because without this, nothing. You can without this piece of information, you can believe anybody's story. And really, if you think about it, at least from my perspective, it never really made sense.
Right.
Something was always missing. And so this piece of information is a huge missing piece, because now it sets a lot of things right.
Right.
Anyone who is of Asiatic, melanated complexion, the original Aboriginal indigenous people of the land, Moor, granted Negro, colored, or black, ethnic nation, you know he was not the slave. You know it.
That's right. Right, and let me, and it's true. That's why this is so great to share this in this forum for those who have ears to hear. But also, when we mentioned the John Adams analysis letter. Now let's just tie a piece in here, as you said, and as we know, that in 1774 we have the Articles of Association posted on the Forgotten Scrolls page of the site, right? All right, you mentioned they asked Congress for them to be independent and free from British. That's what the July 4th and Independence Day is all about. It's not about you, Moors, Aboriginal, Indigenous. Now, they did that, and as you said, there's nowhere to show that the British ever really gave it to them. So when you go to the John Adams letter, which was in 1780, which was 4 years after it was in 1780. So here you are, 1776, where they say they gave it, but the truth is the British never gave it to them. The British Moors did not. And this is where the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, I think, comes in at, because that's who actually acknowledged their position to and allowed them. This is why this Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1787 is of importance to all Moors, because that allowed them to sail afterwards, because that's the only thing that shows that anything was given. What was given was come on over. We'll tell all the ports to, have your flag. I mean, not your flag, their banner, which is the Star Spangled Banner. That's why it's called a banner. You post that you fly that on your ship. We'll let you come through the existing ports. Now, when you get here, we got the law of the land for you. So we extended that French, the Irish French, if you will, to them, because you can't find what the British did. Then you will find other things where the British continue to want to keep them slaves. However, our people think that is the most important thing to me of this is our people think that it was all about them, and it's not. This is their story, and it absolutely should change our position. I yield the floor.
Yes. All right. We have another someone else joining the discussion. Caller 914-382. You are unmuted, but we're going to give the floor to Bakari.
Yes. Brother Bakari.
Brother Bakari, please.
Peace. Wonderful, wonderful show, and I think that your idea to read this piece of literature was great. It was outstanding, and I really enjoyed it. And of course, it made me think about so many things in specific the time frame and who were the individuals.
Hold on.
You got to mute that other person.
Continue. I did. Is Bakari there?
And yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, and so I was thinking, who were these individuals? Like, what were their nationalities? The soul benders, and I think that's what you said. And that was one of the terms.
Those were also modern Europeans.
I see. And so the soul benders and the spirits were one and the same nationality, pretty much. They were at that time.
They were the same. Yeah, they were the same people. They were split. They were the Albions as well.
Okay, so I have a follow-up.
Problem. They didn't have any problem selling their own people just to get ahead.
Sound familiar?
Okay. Yeah. So now, in kind of, because like one of the first things that I try to do is I try to put match the dates up. So we have the colonial articles, which were penned in 1777. And I got that information through RVBey publications and or Anaid, and which is a very interesting. And then you have the Articles of Confederation in let's see, 1781 to 1788.
That was temporary. That was like an 8-year temporary rule of law until the Constitution came in. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So the and I'm going somewhere with this. And so now you have 1643 to 1684, which is listed as the articles. I'm sorry, per the it's kind of like I don't know what the according to the congressional offices, the federal and state constitutions, colonial charters, and other organic laws of the state, territories, and colonies
and that
were formed the United States of America. And that was listed. So what they did is they, during from 1643 to 1684, there was a lot of moving in terms of, putting this plan together to essentially take over the whole continent, which is what I'm gathering from.
Be free.
Well, that actually came much later. Actually, that came as a result of our infighting, because remember, these are the people who came over here. They actually had been boxed out over in Great Britain. They had no trade. They lost the common ground where they could, grow. They didn't have nothing. They came over here.
So
many of them.
Right,
many of them were.
But let me say this. But let me say this, like in terms of a time frame. When I did the video, the video with Ros Mariah, one of the things that I did is I did the research on the colonies and when they were founded. And what I found was that Virginia, the Virginia colony, was the first to be founded, and that was in 1607. So that's roughly 410.
That was the first for Great Britain.
For Great Britain.
The Dutch was here before them.
Okay. And
I'm sorry, not
and
the
so
Dutch. Yeah, the Dutch. The Dutch was here before Great Britain, literally, and actually, what is today called New York,
Pennsylvania,
under the Dutch control, was New Amsterdam. When the Duke of York got a charter from his brother in 16, because I think the Virginia Company charter is dated 1609. So that charter came to the Duke of York, and that's how the Virginia Company actually got started. And they came over, and because of this information that I'm reading here about the colonists, because as they're telling you, they said that like the people of the Dutch Republic, they couldn't compel them to come over here. They didn't have enough people that came over here voluntarily to hold down like their sales territory. So what Great Britain did was they literally kidnapped the Albions off the street and sent them here whether they wanted to or not. And because they were able to hold down large areas and create what they call plantations, which is nothing more than a company operation, but back then they called it plantation. They had enough people that they could, set down these companies across from Maine all the way down to, I know it goes down past Philadelphia. What's past Philadelphia? North Carolina. I think almost all the way down to, all the way down almost to Florida. But pretty much all the way down from Maine, all the way down to Virginia and North Carolina. They had enough people that they could spread out and control that portion of the land for trade.
Do you think that it was a plan to prior to the first prior to the East India Company, and then the first colonists to come over and establish the Virginia colony in 1607, which is called Jamestown, as it was founded, all the way through Georgia, 1732. Do you think that this was planned? Because those are 13 colonies, and 13 is a big number for these.
Yes, but let me just help you to get it straight in your head, which is why I like to go back and use, if you could be calling it a colony or even a state, because we have been so miseducated, we hear colony or state and we think New York State, California State. Really what we're talking about is a company. It's a company. Remember, they were initially started as forts, and the people lived within the fort for safety. That's why in the Constitution, I want to say, I think it's Article 2, I want to say, it says that after 1808, they abolished the charge, I think it was of $10 if you left one state. Like if you were in New Jersey and you left, in order to get into like Florida, you had to pay $10, which was a lot of money at that time. So if you didn't have the $10 to pay to get in, you wasn't leaving New Jersey, because when you left, you were leaving a fort. You had no protection. But the Constitution, see, that's like all of these tolls that they impose on the land. They see in the Articles of Confederation, as well as in Articles of Confederation, they have they prohibit the ingress and regress, and meaning for some people who may not know what that means, it's prohibited from charging you to get into a place and leave a place. Now, some people might think, well, that's not in the Constitution. That might have been in the Articles of Confederation, but it's not in the Constitution. Yes, it is. It's in the 9th and the 10th Bill of Rights. It says if it's not written specifically in here, it is reserved to the people or the state, respectively. So it is in there. But that's what was going on prior to 1808. Those people, those slaves, those Albions, they literally were being held hostage. Because they weren't making any money. So how was they going to come up with $10? But the condition that was imposed on the modern Europeans, that came from brutish wars. And let me tell you, I read this. I chose to read this one because this one gives you some background information. But if I can get through this, what I would like to read next is they were white and they were slaves. That one, it gives. I'm telling you, that one gives. Like in the Statutes of Virginia Assembly, it gives you references. They're not. Now, today you might go and you might look in the Virginia statute and you might see the word white slave replaced with Negro, colored, or black. But they have it in there because that's all there was over here. We were not the slaves. We were so not the slaves. But then they were white and they were slaves. If you think the first chapter of this book was gruesome, where they talked about how the conditions on the ship and how they were drinking water with maggots, with worms in it, it's a little bit even more gruesome. But in They were white and they were slaves. I think the book is. Well, hold on, let me just tell you. This, I'm like, when I read something, it sticks and stays in my head, right? This book, it has a glossary, but the book ends at page 123, I think. I had to stop reading I stopped reading at page 41 because it was so good. This was the conditions. They were white and they were slaves. It goes into explicit details of how they treated the modern Europeans all the way back to children. They were absolutely expendable. Absolutely. Like they had the colonists for sale and they were white and they were slaves. Tells you that they had such an overpopulation of modern Europeans, the slaves, the serfs, that they didn't know what to do. So shipping them over to Morocco, which they call America today, it goes into they thousands. They weren't lost on, they had a large number lost on the travels here, but they had more that they literally worked to death. They literally worked them to death to the point where they would drop dead working. They would pick them up and throw them on a heap of other bodies of modern Europeans who they had worked to death. They were so expendable. I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying I get why we are treated the way we are by modern Europeans, but they got nowhere to go. Nowhere. They don't belong nowhere. If nobody opens the door and says, come on in, they got nowhere to go. Now, at the same time, I get that they're very cutthroat. But you know what? We got some cutthroat people in our family, too. So it's not light to modern Europeans. They had to learn that from somewhere.
Well, there you go. I got to interject Cujo. We started thinking like the colonists. Yeah. There you go. Mm-hmm.
That's right. Yes, they learned that from somewhere. They learned it based on the treatment they had received. And you know what? As I was reading this, I was remembering, I wish I could have flashed it, the picture that RVBey sent of the modern Europeans who were shipped over here in like 12 by 12 crate boxes.
Yes,
naked.
I've seen it. Yeah.
And the picture that they want to allege is of us being transported. There's only one picture, and it's tainted. And we're supposedly packed like sardines. Based on what I just read in this book, right? Didn't they give you the size of the bunk that they had? They had and everything that they was bringing with them had to fit in that bunk. Didn't that sound like the one so-called picture of African slaves on the slave ship? Didn't that sound like they just described that one picture?
Yeah.
Right? If it was you and two children and all your working tools, you had that one bunk. That was like, what, 12 by 7? Some ridiculously small size that, this was a business. And the sad thing is that the Moors, the British Moors, was profiting on a hands-off scale, much like the Union states are profiting today on a hands-off scale, like, my hands are clean, I ain't involved. Yes, you are, because you're receiving some sort of finance. But they're not. But the state is not the one that's putting their hands on you. It's these municipal corporations which were set up based off of this information here in this colonist for sale book. Because they're telling you about the union states, but they're not telling you about the counties, the cities, the towns, or the boroughs. Those were also companies set up as well.
Yeah, but didn't you say that the what they call local government, that's what they call it, the counties, towns, cities, the boroughs, municipalities, basically, that none of them really are under the Constitution. That's why they're telling people that. I mean, they are under
That's
it.
right.
But, yeah.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
Meaning, when I say they're not under it, I mean, on this land, the law is the Constitution. All right?
Yes.
But the Constitution, listen, people don't get it. The Constitution was written to protect the liberties of the people, not any municipal corporation. So, or any of their officers. All right? So it's the obligation of the people to know the law and enforce it. There is never going to be an employee of any corporation that profits off of the pain and suffering of the people that is going to tell the people, this is how you get free so that I can no longer profit. There's no employee of any municipal corporation. And every attorney is an employee of a municipal corporation on foreign to this Moroccan American soil, because if you go and look up the definition of attorney, you're going to find that is an English occupation. This is not England. So who are they working for?
Yes. Which brings me to my next question, which would be most of these, like the London company, so they're all about fiat and commerce.
Human trafficking.
Does anyone know? Right. And in any way, shape, or form that they can acquire it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Moors didn't get involved in that at some point, or some Moors, not all Moors. I'm not going to make a global statement, but because that's obviously not the case. But my question is, does anyone know if the London company, which founded Virginia, and I'm just curious, in 1607, would that be the same as the East India Company, or just another branch?
There was an East India and a West India. One of those companies actually was under the dominion of the Dutch Republic. Great Britain took it over, like stole it, like had a hostile takeover. But it didn't originate with Great Britain. I don't remember if it's the East India or the West India. Most people don't even know there was two. I didn't. There's an East India and a West India. But one of them was controlled by the Dutch.
So
the Dutch Republic.
Next question, real quick. That so all of these, I'm wondering if all of these colonies were sending fiat back to England after they were established.
Oh, absolutely. Because the holder of the treaty was Great Britain. They had to send back tribute. If you watch, Ashley, if you watch The Tudors, or you watch the movie Elizabeth, all right? Her man Raleigh came back with golden doubloons, I think I'm pronouncing it right. He came back and gave her, he came back with Henry and Elizabeth, both of those series. They show you how they came back and gave that. Look, now, you got to always make sure that the king's coffer is full. You ain't going to just go and profit, and because Elizabeth was known. Elizabeth was known for throwing your behind in the tower. If you made a profit and she didn't feel like if she didn't get a cut, or if she didn't feel like she got a fair cut, oh yeah, and if she really felt like you was trying to cut her out, she would kill you and take over. What they call it? Hold on a minute. Don't say nothing. She would kill you and take, because now your children are orphans, right? Right? So now, if your children are orphans, that makes them wards. So she would take over she would create a wardship of the children, and she would sell it to whoever wanted to handle it, administer it, and whoever. Not only did she get finance, I'm not talking just. They all did this. They would pay like if for example Anne had 3 children, and Anne and her husband Tom, did a deal and didn't send tribute to Elizabeth. Elizabeth would grab Anne and Tom and throw them in the tower. And she would have control of the children. And then she would take the children's wardship and offer it to you, Bakari, for $10,000. You pay her $10,000 for the privilege of administering the wardship, but you had to pay her a yearly tithe to maintain that. You have to earn a profit.
Wait a minute. That reminds you of what they do today in their politics when they're running for office and stuff like that, and you have a councilman or they're head of a certain ward. There's a certain amount of finance they have to put up to even run. Yes.
It's all based on the same thing. It's all based on the same thing, and we have a new person, a new Moor joining the conversation. I think this is a sim.
Yes, Islam.
Yes,
brother. Yeah. How you doing, family? And Brother Bakari, how you doing, Islam?
Islam.
Yes, I wanted to join in there. Oh man, it's all in the air. We were studying. We was going in on transportation, and I was studying about transportation here on this continent, and I kept coming across the British Transportation Act of 1718, and that was helping to establish the penal colony, because that's when they were snatching all the prison and cleaning their prisons and things in Britain. But now remember, that only happened after Britain and Scotland unified in 1707, and then after they unified, they start clearing the jails and everything, and start sentencing. The sentence was the transportation over to work the colonies. But while I'm thinking about it, I wanted to say the East Indian and the West Indian both was Dutch country corporations, but the East Indian Corporation was taken over by the Virginia Company because because they made some type of deal trying to get go west, and they got taken over. And then in 1624 they established the West Indian Company, which was another. And these companies were where people pulled together their money, just like they do here with shares. People put their money together with shares and everything, and they established the corporation and come over. But the Dutch, they were they weren't interested in the farming and all that. They were interested in the fur trade and the trapping and all that type of thing. Then Albany, what they call New Amsterdam, and what was it, the Netherlands, and another part of New York, what they call Kingston now. But they set up those outposts there, and that was like McCarty, you was right. It was 1607, 1609. All right, but you had two areas of the continent. You had the Virginia, and then you had the Dutch who started up north. All right, but still was around the same time. You know, because
I got it. It's funny. It's funny that you say that because when I, according to my notes, it says that the North Carolina Company was founded in 1653 by the Virginians.
Well, what happened in North Carolina earlier? They wanted to go into North Carolina, but we have to understand during that time, the Moors was a stronghold from like the 34 on up. The Moors or Spain had a stronghold in that area because when people look at the old maps, all right, from the bottom of Virginia all the way down to Florida, that was they called it the Carolinas, and then it was a split and became the South Carolina. Then out of South Carolina you got Georgia, and out of Georgia you got I think Alabama or one of those when they subdivided. But in the 1540s all the way up to 15 something, the Moors had a stronghold in that area. So the Britain couldn't come down in that area, so they went up above that to Virginia. You know, they had some failed settlements in North Carolina, and then they further came back. You know, so
that's right.
I mean, yeah. So they did go into there, but so all these things was happening at the same time. Now, what I was calling about when you read about William Penn, because I was really, really going in on the studying of Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, and I got the map of well, let's run it down. 1681, when William Penn was given the charter in 1681. All right. Let me see if I can pull it up so I can read the charter, because it's important to read these charters. Charter King James II of England to William Penn, March 4, 1681. Charles II, by the grace of God, King of England, Scotland. Now remember, Scotland and England was battling, then they united. France, Ireland, defenders of the faith, to all to whom these presents shall come greeting. Isn't this funny language? So I'm trying to read it. Where our treaties and well-beloved subject William Penn, Esquire, son and heir of Sir William Penn, deceased out of a commendable desire to enlarge our English empire and promote such useful commodities as may be of benefit to us and our dominions. And why I say it's important to read these is because these words that they use in the English empire, the dominions, all right, as arose to reduce the savage natives by gentle and just manner to the love of civic society and Christian religion, have humbly bestowed leave on us to transport an ample colony unto a certain country hereinafter described in the parties of America, not yet civilized and planted. I'm not going to keep reading it all, but in this here, they talk about the inhabitants, and they call them the inhabitants that was already here, or they call them savages and natives because, you know, they was using the Christian religion, and if you wasn't of that Christian religion, you was a savage, you know.
That's right.
In their eyes, all right? And so, okay, so that was in 1681. Now, once William Penn got the charter in 1681, William Penn turns right around and creates Penn's Charter of Liberties in April 25th, 1682. And in that charter, all right, so some people get that confused with the charter that was given to him in 1681. So in 1682, William Penn creates this charter, and listen what it calls the Penn Charter of Liberties. To all people to whom these presents shall come, whereas King Charles II, by his letter, patent under the Great Seal of England for the consideration therein mentioned, has been graciously pleased to give and grant unto me, William Penn. And now, what King Charles did, because he owed the debt to William Penn's father, he gave William Penn this charter. I mean, this is some other history. William Penn, by the name of William Penn, Esquire, son, heir of Senior William Penn, deceased, and to my heirs and assigned forever all that trace of land or province called Pennsylvania in America, with divides great power, royalties, jurisdiction, and authorities necessary for the well-being and government thereof. Now know ye that all the well-being and government of the said province, and for the encouragement of all the freemen, now they calling themselves the freemen and planters, that may be herein concerned in presence of power aforementioned. I said William Penn had declared, granted, and confirmed, and by these presents for me, my heirs and assigns do declare, grant, and confirm unto all the freemen, planters, and adventurers of, in, and to the said providence, those liberties, franchises, and properties to be heed, enjoyed, kept by the freemen, planters, and inhabitants of and in the said province of Pennsylvania forever. All right? But they go on in here talking about the inhabitants and them being savages and converting them to the Christian religion. All right? So now I want to read something that I found here about Philadelphia, because it's funny when you start studying, and we was only dealing with transportation because we had family members who conveyances was stolen, and we was going into, like you always say, Annie, to get the charters, and so when we start getting into the charters, and so now here I'm going to read something that we found. Philadelphia County, one of the three original counties created by William Penn in November 1682, and its name to him signify brotherly love, although the original Philadelphia in Asia Minor was actually the city of Philadelphia. Philadelphia was laid out in 1682 as the county seat and the capital of the province. It was chartered as a city on October 25th, 1701, and rechartered on March 7th, 1789. Now, these dates are all real significance because it was recharted March 11, 1789. All right, because we know what went on in 1789. All right, on February the 2nd, 1854, all municipalities within the county was consolidated with the city. The county offices were merged with the city government, and as late as 1952. Swedes and Finns first settled within the county in 1638. Dutch seized the area in 1655, but permanently lost control to England in 1674. So when I looked those dates up, what we found was England and the Dutch was warring over in Europe, and England won the war, defeated the Dutch. And so as they had these outposts here, they took them over. Penn's Charter of Pennsylvania was received from the English king in 1681 and was followed by Penn's November 1682 division of Pennsylvania into 3 counties. All right, and this is all it was. The city of Philadelphia merged and became synonymous with Philadelphia County in 1854. Thomas Home made the physical plan for the city, and the Northern Liberties were designated to give urban lots to all who purchased for 5,000 rubles acres in Pennsylvania. The city had 80 families in 1683, 4,500 inhabitants. Now, we know who the inhabitants were. The Adams was the natives of the land. All right. 4,500 inhabitants in 1699, 10,000 in 1720, 23,000 in 1774. We know the importance of that 1774, all right, where we were branded. Philadelphia was economically the strongest city in America until it was surpassed by New York City in population in 1820 and in commerce by about 1830, although Philadelphia was strongest in manufacturing into the early 20th century. It led the nation in textile, shoes, shipping, automotives, and machinery, leadership in the transportation, both depot and on it. But what I want to get to in the bottom of this here, Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation was initiated in 1958. Much retardation of the oldest city, especially east of City Hall, was accomplished. Philadelphia once had a reputation as a private city in the sense of activities of the family and the homes, and had a social pride. There is a notable, strong African-American stuff in there. I missed it. It says that Philadelphia was no longer a government.
Ooh.
Wow.
Well,
a governor
a governor is nothing more than like the CEO of a corporation. So, what are they saying?
Well, what they were saying that the municipalities took over. All the corporations totally took over Philadelphia because Philadelphia was the capital, right?
I was thinking that would have happened.
Yeah,
that would be something when they moved the capital after the Constitution, where they built the what we call the White House today, for that operation of government. That's what comes to my head. That would be what they're saying.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. And then I remember growing up, being in the barbershop and stuff and listening to barbershop talk, and they were saying that all the presidents must come to Philadelphia to visit who I don't know.
And Philadelphia is not one of the 13 colonies. It's not one of those colonies. I'm sorry, or companies, rather. Yeah, I was just saying that Philadelphia, as we know it today, was not one of the 13 companies / colonies.
Right.
Oh no,
it wasn't. Right. It was a smaller scale company. Because you know what I'm looking at, like for example, when you read the letter, well, it's attached to a letter by J. Adams. I think it's on the website. And when the last page, it talks about the dominions of the Emperor of Morocco. And one of the things that I did was I looked up the definition of empire and dominion. And dominion means, if I'm not mistaken, dominion means ownership, and empire would just be like, at that time, and actually today, empire is just like a huge multi-conglomerate. It's like the biggest corporation that you would find. So then, then below that would be like a kingdom. Below that would be like it could be like a state. Below that would be like your county, city, town, township, borough, vicarage, duchy, province. All of these are just another name for some size company / corporation. And all of them. Go ahead.
You want me to read the definition of dominion?
Oh, sure. I know I was looking for it because I took a screenshot of it. But yes, if you got it, go right ahead.
I got it here, page 574 of Henry Campbell Black, 4th edition. Dominion, in the Civil and Old English law, ownership, property in the largest sense, including both the right of property and the right of possession or use. And so that's the shortest definition, and then it goes into the mere right of property as distinguished from the possession or usufruct. The right which a lord had in the fee of his tenant. In this sense, the word is very clearly distinguished by Bracton from Dominicum. Again, this is this definition is based in the Civil and Old English law, and so I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and then if you I wanted to add.
I wanted to just
let me just read the definition of empire, because when you read the definition of go ahead.
Yeah, no. What I wanted to say, based on what he just said, that oh wow, this is English, is because when it says in the Lord of the Sea or tenancy, they're not talking about. They're talking about those who are granted and who are acting as what you might call a landlord, Lord of the Sea. That means they're not they're talking about someone who has use of it. So yeah, the English law. That's all I wanted to add to that.
Yeah, yeah. And then when you read the definition of empire, which I apologize, but it didn't. My screen print didn't capture the page number. But it's from the Blackstone 4th edition dictionary. Empire reads the dominion or jurisdiction of an emperor, the region over which the dominion of an emperor extends, imperial power, supreme dominion, sovereign command. So empire brings back to dominion, and dominion is ownership. So
right.
the empire, so it's telling you that the empire owns whatever. I think the empire is it's to me what I get, because it's not a landmass. Because really, when you look, Puerto Rico, they just let you know Puerto Rico is a municipal corporation. It was never a landmass.
Right.
Never. So if Puerto Rico is not a landmass and it is literally a municipal corporation, everything else is some type of corporation. And when you start to read this book, Colonists for Sale, what they're telling you is these corporations are claiming the people. And by claiming the people, they are alleging to have some power over the people. The people have no free will. You have no choice. That's why they can say, "Oh, are you from?" Like we was talking with a sister last night on the show, and she was talking about how I'm thinking her mate, they kidnapped him, talking about they're going to deport him back to Jamaica. Jamaica's a corporation, but what that lets you know, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that people need to comprehend that these corporations literally, they are claiming you, and you have no say. Well, let me rephrase that. You have a say. As long as you're running around here talking about, well, I'm from Jamaica, or I'm from Cuba, or Mexico, or I'm German, or I'm from Brooklyn, or I'm from California. As long as you are voluntarily joining yourself to these corporate constructs, they will have all the power over what you can say and what you can do.
That's right.
And they will
claim
and just lastly, because the sisters, y'all need to really pay attention to this, they will claim you and they will claim what they call the fruit of your womb.
Yes.
So y'all got to wake up. Y'all got to wake up.
Yes. And going back on what we're speaking of here, going back just like we said, wars, I can add the same thing. Now that you realize how that works in the so-called city, county, or whatever, and you keep saying, I am a citizen/member residing in the city of whatever, then you just submit it to the wardship just by saying that alone, which is why we're saying you cannot say that you live in any of those places. And hopefully, explaining this will help to understand why. And the other thing is, and you just mentioned, even when you went from dominion to empire, you said, well, it really doesn't mean ownership, because the truth is dominion is really ownership, whereas domination is the force. So what they did is they have what is called forced dominion or forced ownership, which is domination. Dominion really is spiritual. Now that goes back to, as you mentioned earlier, the inalienable, unalienable rights of birth, which includes, your rights include property. Your rights include really an obligation. Your rights include obligations from your ancestors before you. Your rights include are corporeal, which are the tangible stuff, and incorporeal, which are not tangible things. And if you look up hereditament, it'll tell you that. There's incorporeal hereditament and incorporeal. So the incorporeal, which are not tangible, those are the ones that are obligations and rights and things like that are not necessarily tangible, but they exist. And one of them is the obligation. And we as a people, more especially with all this information and being shared here now and continue to do so, we have to take our place amongst the affairs of man and recognize about them, it is one thing is very clear. They have no dominion or ownership of any kind of this ancestral estate that we have an obligation to. That is absolutely our inheritance. So they're doing the forced domination and all that, but literally that's not really what they're doing. It's explained. They're sales territories. They've always been that. But if they can convince you to say you live in one of their sales territories, then what did you say?
You become an inhabitant.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Simple, right?
Oh, and I wanted to add one more thing. When you read the charters,
right? Just keep in mind, it's 10:22, and the line is going to go down at 10:30.
Okay.
We actually went over our 10 o'clock limit, but
that's all right. We have a good time.
Yeah. In the charters itself, it tells, for instance, if IBM want to build a building on the land, it gets the coordinates and it build on an area of the land. Well, in the charter, it tells where William Penn was chartered at, and I have a map where it showed just the area of what Philadelphia was. It's not what you see today in Philadelphia, just the area, and it goes from like the Delaware River to the Schuylkill River, from the Schuylkill River over to Arch Street, and from Arch Street west over to Market Street or Walnut Street, and it says it there. So when I was reading that, I was saying it was a city already there. It was a city already there. And this is 1682, so it was a city already there, established. And then it shows where he established the county when he left, came back, and went to where they call, down where the airport at now is Essington, but it's going towards Chester, Pennsylvania area. And then when he went to Bucks County, and those was the only 3 counties, and those areas there. And all the rest of Pennsylvania, it shows on the map what year, for instance, 1682, July 15, deed of lands between the Falls of Delaware and the Neshaminy Creek, confirmed by William Penn, October 1682. Then 1683, June the 25th. Deed, and all of them start, deed of land lying between Pinkapika and the Neshaminy Creek, and backwards to the same, and run 2 days' journey with a horse up into the county as the said river goes. Now, you hear a lot of people who come to Philadelphia and they go on the trip. In 1720, people talk about it was a settlement with the natives there, and you walk so far. Actually, what it says, 1720, December the 16th, deed settling controversy respecting boundaries of the land arising from a dispute concerning distance a man and a horse can reach, can each travel in a day. All right, and that's where you got the capital now in Harrisburg. That was the dispute there. People said it was as far as you can walk, but that dispute was, they said it was walking earlier, and then they changed it in by horse, and that's how they was able to leave Philadelphia and just go as far as the Harrisburg in a day by using a horse. With the land to rob those large portions of land in the agreement. And then after the agreement, when they got there and they said, okay, we made it here, now all you inhabitants have to move off the land.
Yeah,
according to.
I heard about that.
We're gonna have to. I think you were making a point, but I still want to hear it. But 10:26, and I just need to make a couple of announcements before the line shuts down.
All right.
Make sure today's Wednesday. Tomorrow's Thursday. We got Sons of Allah. They got something planned. So make sure and check in for 9 p.m. tomorrow for Sons of Allah. And next Wednesday is the 31st. It's the 5th Wednesday of the month. So we will not be at the National Theater. And what we're going to do is we're going to continue reading this book next Wednesday, the 31st of May. So
sounds right.
It'll be another opportunity to listen and have a discussion, and hopefully we'll be able to get through 3 more chapters, maybe 4. So we're not gonna even bother to close out with our music. We're just gonna close out with the next 2 minutes. I think Bakari had a thought. And
yes,
we got just a minute of a time for you to get it on the table.
Yeah, go ahead, Bakari.
I'm not even going to go with the thought because it's too lengthy. It was about the subject, so I'll just say this quickly that I really enjoyed this. This is a wonderful concept, and I think the only thing that I can add is that it would be great if you could put up maps so that we can have people's minds bent around time frames, because one of the confusing issues is when they hear these dates and places and so on.
Right.
You know, they look at it with tunnel vision.
Yes, and you know what? Maybe Sim, if you can send me some maps, I can post it up. For those of you who don't know, we also have moorishnews.wordpress.com where each of anything is published, and so I can actually add attachments for people to download. So if we ever have a download for anybody, that's where you're going to find it, of course, as well as RVBey publications. But you're definitely going to find it on the moorishnews.wordpress.com. So if we can get some maps together, we'll make it available for.
This weekend, Old Navy's heating up your summer style with $2 tanks for women, girls, and toddlers. Get the season's hottest style essential at this year's hottest price. Just $2. 2 days only, Saturday and Sunday at Old Navy and OldNavy.com. They won't last. Get there fast. Valid 527 to 528 select styles only.